I believe I've mentioned on occasion that my granny just lived right down the road from us when I was growing up, and I used to spend quite a bit of time down to her house, ride my bicycle down to her house and spend Friday and Saturday nights with her. And if there's a holiday, and I got extra time off from school, I'd spend those times with her too. And I'd be there all day on Sunday with her. And she taught me a lot of old timey things and stuff that she used to do when she was a girl and growing up, and different things that she'd been taught. She taught me a lot about cooking, and mostly what she did, though, after Grandpa died, she had a lot of time on her hands. She didn't drive a car, so she didn't go nowhere unless somebody took her. So she spent all her time there at the house, and she used to like to quilt, and she'd knit these house slippers. They were really nice knit house slippers that she'd make, and it'd bring her in a little extra money over top for Social Security. She didn't get much Social Security. She only got 80, I believe it was $80 a month that she got in Social Security, and so she had to be very, very frugal with everything, food and lights and all. Luckily, she's able to get water there at the house without having to pay for it. But she'd make a quilt and sell it once in a while, and she'd make those house slippers, and she sold those house slippers for $1.50 a pair. And then when yarn went up, she had to charge a little bit more. I think she went up to like $2 a pair on them, and it broke her heart to have to do that because she said she knew everybody's hard up for money, but they had jobs. Maybe they could afford it better than she could afford to lose money on making them and buying the yarn. But the the big thing about those quilts that she made, she had several different patterns that she'd make, and I was thinking on them today. I remember she made lone stars and bow ties, and I think she made one that was a wedding ring design, and uh, there was one that it wasn't the log cabin style. I don't remember her ever making a log cabin one, but she had this one that was like little stair steps of squares in different colors that went up in it. That was real pretty. But she decided that she was going to make a quilt for every one of her grandchildren. And these were standard, full size um, quilts. Back then, having a queen size or a king size bed was almost unheard of. Most everybody either had a twin bed or they had a full size bed to sleep in. And so she decided she's going to make them full size, and she's going to make one for every one of her grandchildren. And gosh, I was trying to think today how many grandchildren she had. And I believe, I could be wrong about this, but I think there was 17 of us. And I still, to this day, have the quilt that my granny made for me. It's never been on a bed, and it's always been put up in the closet. I was thinking that I probably ought to pull it down and take a look at it. I've had it wrapped up real good, so that nothing could get at it. I probably need to pull it out and air it out a little bit, take a look at it, maybe even put it on the bed. Because shoot, when I'm gone, there won't be nobody else to appreciate it like I do. And I know that she didn't make it so that I'd just put it up in a closet and never take a look at the doggone thing. But yes, she made one for every one of us, and I can remember her sitting there. She had one light there in the living room beside her chair, and she'd work on them quilts she worked until she got cataracts on her eyes. And I remember that eventually they finally operated on her eyes. Back then, it wasn't like what they do today. It's quick, easy surgery to get them cataracts off uh, with lasers and stuff. But no, back then it was a little more difficult. But they got the cataracts off her eyes. But she'd sit there, and by that one little old dim bulb and that light, only light she'd have on in the house, and she'd sit there and quilt for hours and hours and hours and hours. And she did it all by hand too. there was none of it done on a sewing machine. And she'd cut out them squares, or the designs that she had to piece together, and she'd piece the squares, and then she'd put the squares together in rows, and then she put the rows together, and she'd iron it. After everything she did, on a piece, she'd run over and hit it with the iron, and she'd have like 4 or 5 squares made up, and she'd go and she'd do those squares up with the iron so that they'd lay good and flat for her to quilt the next one. And she taught me how to do all that. I've never tried doing one by hand the way she did it. I've done a couple on a sewing machine. But man, oh man, all them little teeny tiny stitches she do. And then once she got the whole top laid out, she'd take it in and lay it on the bed, and she'd put up the quilt batting to it, and then she'd run thread through the whole thing to hold the batting to it, and then she put the backing to it, and then she'd stitch that, and great big running stitches, to hold it all together. And once she had it all together, then she'd trim everything up around the edges of it, and she put the binding on it, and she'd take it and she'd put it in the quilt hoop. She had a great big old quilt hoop that she'd put in front of her chair, and she'd have to, after she'd get a section of it done, then she'd have to move the hoop and try to keep everything good and straight. And I remember her doing that, Lord have mercy, for hours and hours on end. And when she wasn't doing the quilting, she was making them house slippers, and she loved making them. And her daughters would come to visit her, and they'd have orders for her about what colors and sizes and stuff that they'd wanted those house slippers made up. And she'd try to have them all made up for them when they'd come, and make a few extra bucks there, so she'd have a little extra money when she went to the store to get some more yarn or get stuff for her quilts. And people bring her bags of, she called them quilt scraps. What they was is old clothes. I think every doggone one of them quilts that she made, all the tops of them was made out of old dresses and shirts and stuff that people had. Although I do remember buying a little bit of fabric once in a while, if she had something special, some kind of special design she was trying to make up. But most all of those quilts at least had some of old clothes made up into them. And it was all cotton too. She didn't use no polyester. Oh man, I tell you what, somebody suggested her putting polyester in a quilt, she'd go off on them. There wasn't going to be no polyester in none of her quilts now. But yeah, those are memories that you can't beat. And people don't know even how to sew a button on clothing anymore, let alone make a whole quilt and a whole stack of quilts to give to the descendants of the family. But that was a memory that I thought I'd share with you because it's a special one to me. I hope you enjoyed it.